Welcome. My name is Jason Krause, and today I'll be giving a presentation on a leader in a movie. The movie will be Gung Ho, and this is for the course of leading change in an organization, OLA 809 for Concordia University, Wisconsin. As I mentioned, this will be the movie Gung Ho. It was filmed in 1986, or released in 1986, and it depicts a Japanese automaker opening a plant in Pennsylvania with American workers. And it depicts the Japanese management style versus the typical American work ethic in the 80s. And the thinking in the 80s was that America couldn't compete. The Japanese understood manufacturing much better, worked much harder than the people in the United States, and they were going to become the leading force in manufacturing. As we know, it's not necessarily true, but if you aren't familiar with the Japanese versus American manufacturing story, it's very similar to the Chinese versus American worker story today. So kind of let's get started and see what the agenda is. First, I'll have an overview of the movie, a description of the characters and parties involved, what their culture was like, obviously the Japanese culture versus the American culture, how they collaborated or necessarily didn't collaborate, eventually what affected change, how team building brought them together and made them successful, and what Hunt Stevenson's skills were like. He's the main character of the story, and then that's a wrap, which will be kind of what Hunt Stevenson could have done better to be more successful in the movie. Then finish up with 3 questions that you'll respond to in the discussion forum. So kind of the overview of the movie is a Japanese automaker, Asan Motors, comes to an empty factory that's been empty for about 9 months. It's all been retooled, and Asan Motors is going to come to the plant. The reason they're coming is that the main character, Hunt Stevenson, went to Japan and gave a presentation to them, and they agreed to come over. This is really the last straw for this company. Every other manufacturing is closed in town, and really this is most of the jobs that's keeping the town alive. Asan Motors, kind of setting up the conflict of the movie, is the Asan Motors is a Japanese management style, which typically is company first, worker and worker's family second, always focus on the good of the company, where it's depicted here that the union worker focuses more on relationships. At least Hunt Stevens focuses on relationships, and the union workers kind of are looking out for themselves and want to keep their jobs, so that they're a little bit self-centered. As I mentioned, the main character, Hunt Stevens, is really kind of a go-between the union and the Japanese. He is a little bit favored towards the company. He was brought up as a union line worker, and then was currently a foreman at the previously closed factory. Like I said, I mentioned Michael Keaton as Hunt Stevenson, Gabi Watsubi as Oshi, Kazuhiro. You may recognize him from 16 Candles. Another character in the movie was George Wendt as Buster in the Union. So those are the people who kind of played the characters or represented the parties. Hunt Stevens was kind of the manager, trying to balance the Japanese versus the union cultures. He was a people first before the company, and mentions in the movie, we're only building cars, this isn't brain surgery. Whereas Kazuhiro is from Japan and represents the Japanese mentality that's portrayed in this movie, saying that the company is first. If a car goes out defective, the worker should feel responsible for that. And the union members are really just trying in the scenario here to keep their jobs, to get a raise, and bring more union members back. So they're kind of focused on just themselves. As I'm kind of set up, the two Japanese versus union workers, these are two very different cultures in life, how they live and how they work. This movie is typically used to portray cultures in the workforce, but it definitely has some of the fundamentals we have gone over in the course. Stevenson is ingrained in the union culture, as I mentioned before. He really does not understand the Japanese culture whatsoever, and at many times he insults them openly, and doesn't really seem to understand that, and has very little emotional intelligence towards the Japanese. He thinks he's doing a good job, kind of blind to his actions when he deals with the Japanese. Throughout the movie, there really isn't any choice to blend the two cultures. The Japanese company gives Hunt a booklet that says, "Can you get your workers to agree to this?" And he says, "Sure," but the workers aren't really that receptive to the Japanese working demands. But Hunt kind of sells it to him and says, "Well, just play along for a little bit, and then once we start making cars, we'll just go back to the way we're typically have done business." And each side, the Japanese felt the worker should change, and the workers felt the management was going to change and see it their ways. They both were successful. Maybe the U.S. wasn't quite as successful because their plant closed, but the Japanese, they both felt they were successful and had made cars in the past and thought they were right in their own way. Which brings us to the collaboration or lack thereof. And what I just really explained were the two silos, the Asian silo and the union silo, which made Hunt Stevenson just basically run back and forth. I mentioned he never really collaborated. He would tell the workers pretty much what they wanted to hear, and he would tell some of the issues to the Japanese management, but never really work out a solution or never really bring the two silos together. And I'll talk about that in some of his leadership qualities. So the one thing he does try to do to bring the two together is that he comes up with a goal that Japanese decide that the U.S. workers can't make enough cars and aren't making good enough quality cars, so they're going to close the plant. So Hunt comes up with a goal or an agreement with the management that the U.S. workers will make 15,000 cars. So he presents this to the union workers, and they don't necessarily agree because they've never made that many cars. So he kind of sells them a false goal of 13,000 cars, and they'll get half of the raise. If they get 15,000 cars, they'll get the full amount, and he kind of sells them that if they get 13,000, they won't. They'll get partial raise, which is not true, and kind of sets up a scenario that leads to the union workers not believing in him. The only way really the collaboration would work is really to bring the human element together, to bring the people from management and the people from the union together in one spot, and create a relationship. And this did happen. It happened in a somewhat kind of a non-typical way, but it started with Hunt Stevenson and the Mr. Kazuhiro. Those two kind of had they went out for drinks and kind of explained their sorrows to each other, and each person said, "Woe is me," and the other one said, "Woe is me," both realizing they had problems and kind of laughing at each other, saying, "Wow, you really have big problems." At this point in the relationship, or the beginning of this relationship, at this point, they didn't realize that they both had the same problem. They just realized they had different problems, and how was each of them going to solve their own problem. Um, Kind of a critical point is that Quasi Hero kind of freaks out and jumps into the river, and Hunt Stevens saves him out of the river, and they're basically sitting on the bank, kind of at their lowest point. And then they realize that both of them really had made some mistakes while trying to roll this project out. And they affected a lot of lives, and the town wasn't going to be the same with the closing of the plant. And, you know, if they really should have worked together and come together, and if they would have had another chance, they could have maybe saved the company. So that leads into the scene, really, which is team building. They didn't realize, they didn't really become a team until they reached their lowest point. And so once they reached their lowest point, they weren't going to reach the goal of 15,000 cars. So Quasi Hero and Hunt went into the plant to try to accomplish the extra 1,000 cars at the end of with only a few hours remaining. Eventually, the union members come into the plant and join in to finish up the extra 1,000 cars they needed to get the 15,000 cars and achieve their raise. But the union members really didn't join in together until the leaders started acting like leaders. They were more acting like managers. Problem, just addressing problems, never really looking forward, never looking how to be the best of each culture, to learn from each other. They were just doing their duties for, say, as a manager. And to reiterate it just a little bit on a little bit different way is the employees didn't join together until the leaders were working together. They took their key when they saw the management and the Hunt Stevens, their coordinator, working together. They felt, you know, if they can work together, then we can work together and we can help them out. So all of the Japanese managers were helping to create the 15,000 cars, and so were all the union workers trying to create the 15,000 cars. Really coming together and working towards a goal. I know in some of our conversations we said, you know, what depicts a team, and really they all felt they kind of had something to lose. They were working towards this goal, working hard towards that goal, and each one had a little bit of a stake in the losing of it. And to be successful, it was depicted in the movie in a kind of musical display of blending the U.S. and the Japanese techniques together so that they both could be successful. So that kind of also showed a little bit of teamwork using both techniques to be successful. Now let's just kind of get to the leadership skills of Hunt Stevenson. He is not a sophisticated leader. He doesn't really display any of the techniques that we kind of cover in our class on how to solve problems or whatever. He just kind of solves problems and tries to get questions answered, which I would say is your typical leader. That's typically what you see and typically what I've seen. Like I explained to him before, as typical manager. I will give him credit though that he in the beginning scenes they showed him going to Japan to give a presentation to bring Asan Motors to his town, and that did give a display of divergent thinking, because being a foreman, going by yourself, trying to give this presentation to bring a multi-million-dollar company over, it really is thinking out of the box. It's not typically the person you would send or how you'd go about it. So that showed him, you know, thinking out of the box and really wanting to do the right thing, and he really wants to save the town, which kind of takes us to the next point of him being a very authentic leader. Everybody, especially that he had worked with and in the union, he had personal relationships with. He had talked about their families, and they all played baseball together, really had good relationships with them, had come up from the assembly line to be the foreman, so really understood all of his employees, which really kind of was his best asset, because when there was organizational conflict in which he got in a physical fist fight with one of the the union members and also Quasi-Hero, they had those relationships to come back and settle their differences. And not to say we all have physical fistfights at places we work, but I mean, at times we argue with each other, raise our voices with each other, maybe slam a door, walk away disgusted. But you know that the people that you are truly friends with and truly understand and have good relationships with, you can come back together and almost as nothing happened and move on and carry out the issues. And I would say that's kind of his saving grace of this, is that he is such an authentic and liked leader. He is able to still survive without the techniques you would think a great leader would have. And he's also very visible. They show him grinding on the assembly line. They always show him out on his golf cart with people on the line. He's very, very visible as their leader. And he does try. They show him several times in the office with the Japanese. So he's a visible leader. He shows he's working, but he really doesn't possess the skills. And that's kind of our next part. He never really considered trying to get the both workers to work together. He just answers questions and expects the other kind of to change. He says, oh, the workers need a day off, or the workers don't want to do this, and he doesn't ever really explain it. He never brings the two face to face for an understanding. And that kind of goes to the point that he thought he could solve all the problems himself. A worker had a problem, he'd come up with an idea, he would try to sell it to the management, and that's what got him in his large predicament of starting to have the goal of creating 15,000 cars, which he sold to both sides, but then he got himself into a further predicament when the union members said, we can't make 15,000 cars. We need a lower goal, and he comes up with 13,000 cars, which the company never agreed to, and eventually leads to a great falling out between the union members and the union members and Hunt Stevens. They all kind of walk off the job. And another part of his leadership and effectiveness is that he didn't understand the Japanese at all. He had zero emotional intelligence towards the Japanese, and would insult them quite often with slang terms and kind of stereotypes. And not that they showed any difference to them, it just showed his ineptness as a leader, as his emotional intelligence would be. That kind of wraps up the progression from the two cultures kind of coming together as their silos, reaching a low point, and then finally working together to reach a goal. So what could Hunt Stevens done so that they wouldn't have to make this transition a lot easier? What could he have done? And I think that culture should have been established before workers really brought in. They gave him, the Japanese company, Asan Motors, gave him a pamphlet, and he didn't even open it up. He said, do you think you can get your workers to do this? He said, sure, I can. In more colorful language, but he said, sure, I can. So the workers came back thinking they had their old job back. They actually did have their old job back. They all kind of went to the same spots they worked in before they were laid off. And that culture stayed. That was probably the best time to bring in a new culture and coach everybody up. That would be my take on that. Hunt should have been a facilitator between the union members and the Japanese. He could have really kind of worked better to bring them together. He ran between them, but he never really sat them down at a table together and make them understand. Let them build a relationship together. And really, in the end of the movie, the union had bought in, and so did the workers, but they kind of bought in a general term. It first took him and Quasi-Hero to form a relationship before everybody else joined in on the relationship. And he could have used that 15,000 car goal as a change mechanism, albeit they had the goal and the workers wanted to get the goal. get their raise and get more employment. I think that maybe the goal shouldn't have been the goal of it. The cars shouldn't have been the goal. Bringing the workers together and coming up with the best ideas and the best work processes, and how are we going to work together to make 15,000 cars every month instead of just racing to get 15,000 cars and then trying to save the planet. I think it could have been a learning experience instead of just trying a goal experience. And the other thing is, he never brought in an expert. He never went to anybody. He confided in his girlfriend a little bit, but he never really went to an expert. He never went to somebody and said, hey, what should I do? How should I do this? And I think that's kind of a fault of his, because he did not have the skills really to be a leader at this level. So that's kind of one of the things that I thought he could have done. And the three questions would be is, how can you change the culture while you're trying to run a business? We're all trying to, every company's trying to make money, every company's trying to fill orders, everybody's trying to get to their product. So how can we change the tires while we're still driving the car? How can that be done without losing production and really messing things up? The second question would be is, what part of the culture should change and what should stay? Kind of mentioned the blending of the two work processes at the end of the show when they reach their goal and they're using teamwork. But what should stay and what should go? Maybe some things are offensive to the people of Japan, and some things from Japan are offensive to the people in the U.S. Should anything that's offensive to each be gone, or what should stay? How should the culture be made? Even if things aren't necessarily perfect, what's the give and take on accepting each other's culture is kind of what I'm getting at there. And who ultimately holds the power to collaborate? Work as a team or change the culture? Should it have been the Japanese? Because they were the managers, they were in charge. Should have been Alan Stevens. He was the employee coordinator. He had access to both sides. Or was it the union workers? Because they should have been thankful for their jobs and done what the Japanese had asked them to do. Or maybe all three of them. I'm looking forward to seeing your posts, and thank you for watching my presentation.